to get everything set up here, John chapter 4 is where I'm going to be out of for the vast majority of today. You can ask my wife in the back there. I handed her scriptures last night and said, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And she looked at me like I wasn't a crazy man. But it's all good. I just want to thank Robbie and the church for allowing me to come up here. They came to me a couple weeks ago and was like, hey, we want you to preach. And I'm like, okay, cool. Are you sure you want me to do this? I don't know that you really know what you're getting yourself into. Just to give you a little bit of my history, I used to be a youth pastor. I'm in the Army, but the last place I was at, I was a youth pastor there for a couple years. So I have a tendency to talk to young people. I know I've got my kids in here, and I'm not saying anybody's old because I'm getting old. But I have a tendency to talk to you like you're 15 or 16. So please forgive me if I use cultural references for teenagers, because that's what I'm used to. But I will attempt to keep everything on the level. Anyways, John chapter 4, verse 5. I'm reading out of the New King James. So he came to a city of Samaria, talking about Jesus, which is called Sychar, or something like that, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. And a woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink, for the disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The woman of Samaria said to him, How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For the Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Okay. Give a little bit of context here if you don't know. The Samaritans used to be Jews. Okay. What had happened back in 2 Kings 17:24. I didn't give that one to you. You don't have to go there. But 2 Kings chapter 17, what had happened is the Assyrians had brought a whole bunch of foreigners in to this particular area that the Jews inhabited so that they could essentially wipe out the children of God through, infestation of foreign idols and foreign peoples, and children of God weren't supposed to do that, blah, blah, blah. So that's where the Samaritans came from. So they were despised by the Jews because they were essentially half-breeds. They were like half Jew and half not, and that was very, very frowned upon. So for Jesus, a Jewish man, to go up to a Samaritan woman, or she approached him, but, to say, hey, give me a drink of water, was very out of place for the time. Okay? Shouldn't have happened. That's why we'll read on a little further that, that's why it was in verse 9, she said, what are you doing? Why are you talking to me? It's very out of place. It just doesn't make sense. She cannot reconcile this in her mind. And that's why there was such a deep-seated hate of the Samaritans that instead of traveling through Samaria to get to Jerusalem or wherever they would go if they were coming from the northern part of Israel, they would actually travel around so as to not go through the area. Kind of like, I'm a good old country boy, so I try to avoid the inner city at all costs because I feel like I'm gonna get shot. Praise Jesus, and I don't fear dying, but I just don't want to go early if I don't have to. Same concept. They went around. All right. So, verse 10, Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. The woman said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where do you get the living water? you can say, I like this woman. Okay, this woman is me. Guy comes up to you and says, I have, can you give me a drink of water? Okay, first off, why are you talking to me? Because you don't talk to me. And he says, well, if you would have known who's really asking you for water, you'd have asked me for water. And she looks at him and is like, dude, what are you doing? You can't draw water. Where are you getting this water from? She's very, 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 I don't want to say cynical, but, as we read on in here, we see that she's not had a great life. So she's looking at Jesus and going, there's something not right. There's something not right, and I can't put my finger on it. Verse 11, the woman said to him, Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where do you get the living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock? Jesus answered and said to her, Whoever drinks this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water that I may not thirst nor come here to drink. And Jesus said to her, Go call your husband and come here. The woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, You have well said, I have no husband, for you have had 5, and the one who you're with now is not your husband, and that you spoke truly. And the woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on the mountain, and the Jews say that in Jerusalem. And okay, so reading this conversation, right? This conversation seems to make absolutely no sense. I mean, to me, it's just like, yeah, you've had 5 husbands, and you're currently living with your 6th. That's not really your husband. And she said, yeah, you're a prophet. So let's talk about worship. It just doesn't make sense to me. But in the roundabout short of it, she is questioning him on cultural issues that of the time. And I don't have time to go into all of them, or to go into this very deep, because then we'll be here forever. And but I got an hour. Wow. I don't think I've ever had this much. I've never had this much freedom to speak. Normally, I have like 30 minutes, and I go for like 2 hours. So now I actually got time, and it's like, wow. I don't know if I'm gonna make it. We might be out by 11:30. That'd be awesome. Sorry, we're gonna skip down to verse 28. So it said, the woman then left her water pot and went her way into the city and said to the men, Come see a man who told me all the things that I ever did. Could this be the Christ? Then they went out of the city and came to him. So what we have, all right, what I'm talking about today is marking of an individual. And you say marking, we have a generation of kids. We have a generation of people who are enthralled with tattoos. Okay. I would roll up my sleeves. I have some myself. They're enthralled by tattoos. They're enthralled by marking themselves because they want to be marked by somebody. They want to be marked by something. They don't know what it is. That's why we're going into the tattoos and the drugs and the partying and all of this experimentation that people go into because they want to be marked. They want to be known. They want to be loved. But there are so many substitutions for it that we get it confused. And little did you know, Robbie, your testimony just slides right in with this. It's awesome. God chooses to use the weak, the meek, the mild, the people that nobody would ever assume that God could use. Because it's cool. If God were to use everybody that we say, he's a good Christian. He's a good Christian. Grew up in church his entire life, has never done anything wrong. yes, God can use that person. But you know who God really likes to use? God really likes to use people like this woman who essentially was a prostitute, been married 4, 5, 6 times, and especially in ancient Israel, it's not really looked highly upon in our society, a little more than it used to a few years ago. People not. But in this society, getting divorced was terrible. It puts you at the bottom, the lowest of the low. And then to be divorced 5 times, you're talking, nobody would probably even talk to this woman. And we go and we see, and it says she came and told the men. Why would she come and tell the men? Women are not supposed to talk to men in this society, outside of domestic home life. Not supposed to talk to men. But my theory, I don't know this for sure, but just my theory on this is she had to go talk to the men because they were the only people that would talk to her. Because they were the only people that would engage with her, because she was so low. She was so low on the totem pole, so low with everything that, she was, in our society, she's the homeless drug addict that nobody cares about. Nobody wants to take the time to go there. And that's the one that Jesus goes to. That's the one that Jesus goes and says, hey, I love you. I love you in spite of everything that you have done. In spite of all these things. Yes, I know about all these things. Why did he bring up the 5 husbands? And because he wanted her to know, I know absolutely everything that you have done. But it's okay. I still love you. And God uses the people that nobody wants to use, because out of that, God can demonstrate his power more so than he can demonstrate it through somebody that grew up in Sunday school and did this and did that and, has lived the perfect life, which nobody's lived the perfect life. We all know that. But, perception. Perception is a powerful thing. Because, as a kid, I'll give you this. As a kid, I used to look at my pastor and be like, that man is God. He's perfect. And then I got older, and I started hanging out with my youth pastor. And I got to realizing that, man, this guy's more screwed up than I am. But that's okay. Not that we stay messed up, but that we're messed up and we allow God to use that about us. See, God marked a woman in an encounter. And in that process, in the process of that change, she changed her entire city. Because she went out into her city and said, listen, I'm not exactly sure who this guy is yet. He says he's the Messiah, but I'm not 100% sure on it. But I'll tell you what he did for me. I'll tell you what he did in me. And that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing that we have to do. We have to be willing to share the change that has happened in us. Because it's not just about me getting to heaven. It's not just about me. It's about the kingdom thinking. When Jesus said, taught him the Lord's Prayer and said, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's not just about, hey, let's get saved so I can, go home and I'll pay my tithes occasionally and I won't lie and I won't cheat on my wife and I won't do this and I won't do that. And when I die, I'll go to heaven. No, it's not about that. It's about how many people can I take with me to heaven? We can't take materialistic things with us. We can't, no matter how the biggest house you have, you can't take it with you. The only thing that you can take with you when you go is the lives of the people that you have touched along the way. And that's it. That's the whole thing. Is that when we're saved, we have to go out into and do. God marks us when we're saved. He reaches down his hand and puts a mark, puts a thumbprint, puts a handprint on our soul that changes us forever. But that's not the end. That is merely the beginning. All right, but I want to look at something else in this same passage as well, because what happens is we actually have two conversations going on here. We have one conversation where Jesus is talking to the woman at the well, and then in verse 34, we are actually starting in verse 32, we have a conversation between Jesus and his disciples. Okay, and it says, "But he said to them, I have food to eat of which you do not know." They went in, like I said earlier in the story, they went into the city to buy food, and they come back, and he's like, I'm not hungry. Okay, verse 33, "Therefore the disciples said to one another, has anyone brought him anything to eat? Jesus said to him, my food is to do the will of him who sent me, and to finish his work. Do you not say, there are still 4 months, there are not 4 months, and then comes the harvest. Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes, look at the fields, for they are already white for the harvest. And he who reaps receives wages and gathers fruit for eternal life, that both he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together." But in this, the saying is true. One sows and another reaps. I have sent you to reap for which you have not. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labors. And many of the Samaritans in the city believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified, he told me all that I ever did. We have two conversations going on here. All right. In this conversation we have with the disciples, okay, we already talked about the Samaritans being just despised. Okay, what we have to understand is all the disciples were Jews. And they were Jews. So when they're going through Samaria, in the back of their mind, they're going, why are we even walking this way? What's he up to? Normally we go the roundabout way and don't cut through here. What are we doing? And then he tells them to go into the city. So we're going into a Samaritan city, which trying to find kosher food, which is probably not the easiest thing in the world to do. Okay? And then Jesus is hanging out by the well. And Jesus is doing what Jesus does, because Jesus does weird stuff that we don't completely understand all the time. So, okay, fine. We come back and he's talking to a woman. We already talked about how culturally unsound that was. But and that the Bible says they didn't dare ask him, because they'd seen enough by this point. We're in chapter 5 of John. They'd seen enough by this point to know that he doesn't always do what's done normal by the culture. And then he looks at him, and he says, and I can see it, sitting at the well, looking out at the city, and he says, look and see that the harvest is full, that they're ready, that you need to go into them. And they're sitting here going, are you serious? Really? You want us to go and talk to them? But how many times do we do that? How many times do we do that? Do we not remember the place that God pulled us from? And we say, I'm not going down there. Are you serious? I'm not going to go to them. I'm not going to go down there and just walk up to a bunch of, inner city gang kids and start witnessing to them. I'm not going to do that. Are you crazy? Because they're not worth it. That's exactly what the disciples would have said. That's exactly what the Jews of the time would have said. They're not worth it. I am worth the sacrifice that God made, but you're not. How can we say that? How can we even remotely do that? Now, I'm not accusing anybody in the room. Please don't think that. I'm talking more about the church at large, but it's so many times that we do it, even unknowingly. We look at our neighbors and we say they are the most ungrateful, heathenistic people I've ever met in my entire life. Speaking from experience. But instead of showing them love, we show them hate. We say, I just don't know about them. I just want to strangle them. The next time they come over and knock at the door and yell at me because the kids are being too loud, I'm going to murder them. Now, but we do it. And we say, you know what? God's blood's not strong enough for you. The blood of Jesus is not strong enough for that. It's good enough for me. It's good enough for me. But it's not good enough for you. See, the thing we have to understand is that when we're marked, that our story begins again. When we're saved, when we come in, our story begins again. We cannot forget the things of the past, because those that forget the things of the past are doomed to repeat them. We have to remember the things of the past, but however, we have to also in our mind there has to be a mindset change, because in my life I can say, God, why are you letting me do this when I've done this, and this, and I can list them. But then in the background, there's always this general reminder that said, you're new, you're different, you're not the same as you used to be. Yeah, sometimes we deal with struggles, we deal with temptations, but we deal with them differently than we used to. In this, I just got to read this. It is your story that must be told after an encounter with Christ. The past is gone and the new life begins. However, your story of redemption is what will make others believe in the Messiah. This woman who was marked and changed by a single encounter with Christ, and changed her entire life. And we can look all through the Gospels and see a single encounter with Christ that changed their entire lives. The woman with the issue of blood who came after Christ and just touched the hem of his garment because she had enough faith to believe that if I can get close to him, I don't even have to talk to him. If I can just get close enough to touch him, that I'll be okay. But it seems today in our day, in our church, in our society, that we have forgotten that we have forgotten that one single touch from the hem of his garment is just one drop of his blood, just the tiniest thing can change people's lives, entire lives forever. And we seem to have forgotten that because we're more concerned with church attendance and the number of people that come into the church. And again, I'm not talking about this church in per se. I'm just talking about the church in general. But we're more concerned with the name tag that walks in the door. The guy that can give us the most money. We'll play favorites with them. But whenever we see the homeless hobo, the person, the least of them, that Jesus said, bring the least of them. Bring them to me. Those are the ones I want. Because you know how much time Jesus actually spent in the temple? Not much. And the time that he did spend in the temple, he spent making people mad. He'd walk in and form a whip of cords, run the money changers out of the temple. You know, the time he spent in the temple, he spent making people mad. And he spent his time among the least of them. But we, myself included, a lot of times won't, because they smell bad. Because I'm too busy. Because I don't want to. Because I would much rather sit home and watch an entire season on Netflix in 24 hours than do anything else. But you see, that's what's considered normal for us. What's considered normal is to come to church for an hour and a half on Sunday, maybe an hour on Wednesday. And that's it. I was listening to a guy named Damon Thompson this morning before I came here. And what if you talked to your wife for an hour and a half on Sunday, maybe an hour on Wednesday, or your husband? How would that relationship go? Probably wouldn't for very long. I know my wife kind of gets mad at me when I, ignore her for a couple hours. Occasionally. She's giving me bad looks back in the back there. But what we consider normal, we have accepted normal, the culture's norm, as our normal. When as the church has always been set as antithesis, the complete opposite of the culture. From the very beginning, the church has always been at odds with the culture, because we're not supposed to accept the culture. We're supposed to change the culture. But when we get so self-absorbed in ourselves, when we get so self-absorbed in realizing that the power of Christ doesn't necessarily work the way we think it does. And if it doesn't work the way we think it does, if it doesn't work in an hour and a half, and if I can't invite somebody to church on a Sunday morning, and if God's gonna do it, he's gonna have to do it before 12 noon because I've got a meeting. I got a meeting down at the Kentucky Fried Chicken. I'm from the South. That's where we go eat dinner. Go to Kentucky Fried Chicken after church. But Jesus broke all the rules. He broke all of the cultural norms. He broke everything for one encounter with one woman to change a city, to change a region. How much more is he looking to do through you? How much more is he looking to do through the church, through our church as a whole? Because the devil would be real happy if we keep everything in here on Sunday mornings. But it's whenever we start going out that he starts getting angry. Because I can tell you, been here for 3 years. I know everybody has probably lived here their entire lives or longer than me. But I can tell you on this campus, demons fight. I can tell you that. I live there. Demons fight for those kids. Demons fight for the future. It's our responsibility to go help win that war. And not just Lighthouse Christian, but every other church in this area. Because the thing I love the Bible, because everything is so much deeper, and it always gets deeper. It's always gets deeper. And I'm only on page 1 of notes. I'm sorry, I'll move. When God talks about the church, he's not just talking about the Pentecostal church. And he's not just talking about the Baptist church down the road. And he's not just talking about the Catholic church up there in town or any other church that we have around here. When he's talking about the church, he's talking about anybody who believes in him. That's the church. That's the ecclesia, the governing body of the church, the governing body that when Jesus looked at Peter and said, on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail. You will have the keys to death, or you will have the keys to open and shut doors. And what you open in heaven will be opened in earth, and what you loose or what you bind in heaven will be bound on earth. That's the church's responsibility, to come together. A bunch of marked individuals have to come together to affect a generation. Because if we don't do it, who will? If we don't rise up and say, you know what, I've had enough. I'm tired of seeing babies killed. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of the drug problem. I'm tired. If we don't do it, who will? Or are we content? Are we content that we've had our encounter with Christ, but the rest of the world can die and go to hell? Are we content with that? Or are we willing to bow, to bend our knees, to say, you know what? It's time to win a generation. It's time to go and win. It's time to say, you know what? The fields are white, and I'm going to go. And I'm going to say, you know what? It's time. It's time to grab a hold and take back what has been stolen from the kingdom of God. Shh. Child. That's my child. I'm going to read this. A marked generation. A generation needing to be marked by something. So they take ink and mark themselves in a vain attempt at feeling like they belong to something bigger than themselves. There is a marked remnant that has been chosen to bring the light of Christ back to the world. All throughout the Bible, we see that God chose those to raise up a remnant among the people to bring redemption to the land again. I'll read that again. Got that while I was praying. That's good stuff, right? There is a marked remnant that has been chosen to bring the light of Christ back to the world. All throughout the Bible, we see that God chose to raise up a remnant among the people to bring redemption to the land again. So I'm going to jump to 2 Kings. Just throw that up there for me, dear. In 2 Kings, we have Elijah. And I hope all this is going together and I'm not jumping around too much. But what's going on here is Elijah is getting ready to go up into heaven and Elisha is getting ready to take his place. And so we're going to read. And it came to pass, when they were gone over, that Elijah said unto Elisha, ask what I shall do for thee before I be taken away from thee. And Elisha said, I pray, let a double portion of thy spirit be upon me. He said, thou hast asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if thou see me when I am taken from thee, it shall be unto you. Literally what that says, in the literal translation, if you walk my walk, if you follow the path that I have set out for you, you will have my blessing. And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up into a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. And he saw him no more, and took a hold of his own clothes, and rent them in two pieces. He took also took up also the mantle of Elijah that fell from him and went back and stood by the bank of the Jordan. And he took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him and smote the waters and said, Where is the Lord God of Elijah? And when he has also smitten the waters, they had parted hither and thither. King James. And Elisha went over, and when the sons of the prophets which were at Jericho saw him, they said, The spirit of Elijah doth rest on Elisha. And they came to meet him and bowed themselves to the ground before him. This right here is an example, is a type and shadow of John the Baptist and Jesus. Okay? It's also a type and shadow of the church and Jesus. Because if we follow after Jesus, okay, if we follow him and we get as close to him as we can, because before this, Elijah and Elisha went through 7 different cities, and all of them said the same thing. They said, Your master's going to be taken from you today. Hang out here. And Elijah looked at Elisha and he said, Why don't you stay with him? Be a good idea. And Elisha said, Absolutely not. I will follow you until the bitter end. 7 times. And finally, after the 7th time, they got to the river Jordan. They crossed it, and Elijah went up in a chariot of fire, and Elisha received his mantle. But what would have happened if he would have stayed at any one of the 7? That mantle would have not been passed to him, and he wouldn't have been marked. He wouldn't have had the same. He wouldn't have gone on and done the 14 miracles that he did. 14 or 16, I can't remember. He wouldn't have went on and done the miracles that he did and saved the lives that he saved and been the man of God that he was if he wouldn't have stuck to the path that God had laid out before him. And that's exactly what we have to do to infect a generation with him. We have to sit down and we have to get as close to him as we possibly can and allow his spirit to guide us and to point the path out. Even though we make mistakes, even though we mess it up, there's still the grace to go. We must be willing to accept the holy, invisible God as the great architect of the universe, allowing our belief in this to change our opinion about ourselves. If he can create the universe with just a flick of his finger, then he can change the wretched creature known as man into the image that suits his divine purpose. We must be willing to accept God into our lives, willing to accept him to change us. Whether you've been saved 35, 40, 50, 60 years, or you don't even know him yet, there's still a process. And he still loves you. And it's never too late to affect the world around us and infect them. Because if it isn't for us, who's going to do it? Who's going to lift the people up in prayer? Who are they going to come to when they're dying? When they need help? When the doctors give them the death sentence and say there's nothing we can do? It's inoperable. Who are they going to come to? Are they going to come to a church that's just barely surviving? Or are they going to say, hey, somebody told me, and I don't know, but somebody told me down here, if you go to that Lighthouse Christian or you go to the Baptist church down the way, that they'll lay hands on you. And they'll say, you know what? Be healed. And people's got new livers and new pancreases and new joints and eyesight, and they can hear. Do we want to be that people? Or do we want to be the people that come here for an hour and a half on Sundays and then go home and do whatever we want to do the rest of the week? Do we want to be the woman at the well who has a choice encounter?